So we're now on the bottom of Daf Kuv Zayin Amud Aleph, Iboilahu, 2 lines up before the end of the Amud. Now we're starting a brand new sugi. The Mishnah says that on Erev Pesach, Samach LeMincha, we're not supposed to start a meal. And Iboilahu, the Gemara has a starting suffix. What do you mean Samach LeMincha? What mincha are you talking about? Samach LeMincha Gdola Tanan, O Dilma Samach LeMincha Ketana Tanan. Mincha Gedola is midday, noon, which is otherwise known as the end of the 6th hour, which would be an hour clock from 11 to 12, the beginning of the 7th hour at 12 noon. And that's called Mincha Gedola. And that's the earliest time that you can be makriv the Karban Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim. And on Erev Pesach Shechalios, the Erev Shabbos, we had a sugya, if you recall, back in Tamid Nishchat, that we can be makdim it to Sheish Umechza. That means 12:30 on that clock. And here we're talking about Samach LeMincha, which is at 12 noon, a half hour before Sheish Umechza. Or does Mincha in our Mishnah, Samach LeMincha, mean Mincha Ketana? So Mincha Ketana, we split the 6 hours between noon and nightfall. So we add the 7th and the 8th and the 9th hour to the beginning of the afternoon, and that's called before Mincha Ketana. And from the beginning of the 10th, so you have the 10th, 11th, and 12th, that's called Mincha Ketana, at the beginning of the 10th hour. Now, that's the latest time that they used to bring the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim on a regular day. And the Gemara in Tamid Nishchat says that the Karban is brought until Teisha Umechza, and Samach LeMincha means we add another half an hour, so that's the beginning of the 10th hour. The Gemara now analyzes the 2 tzadim in the Saf. Samach LeMincha Gedola Tanan, why would we assume that a person should not be Kovei Suda and eat a loaf of bread at Mincha Gedola as early as noon? And the reason is because Mishum Pesach, because on Erev Pesach in the afternoon of Yudalid, you're busy with the Karban Pesach. And if you're going to be eating a Seuda, then Dilma Asi Limimchach, maybe he'll get so involved in the Suda, and here we're going to turn to Daf Kuv Zayin Amud Beis, the Asi Limnuye Milamevad Pescha. And he may get so involved in his eating that he won't bring the Karban Pesach in its time. And even though you could bring the makriv, the Karban Pesach, technically until the evening, but the Chachamim were worried. They don't want you to get so involved in eating that you might even be nimshach besuda even until the erev, and he may delay bringing the Karban Pesach. So that's one side to say l'chumra that we have to stop eating already at noon. Oh, Dilma. Later on, the Gemara is going to say there's some things you are allowed to eat after noon, but can't eat a loaf of bread. Or shall we say Samach LeMincha Ketana Tanan? We're not worried about Karban Pesach. That's not the underlying motive of the Chachamim in our Mishnah, but rather Mishum Matzah. They're worried about a person who's going to eat a Seuda very close to the end of the day, to Shkia of Yom Yudalit, and Dilma Osi L'Michli Matzah Achila Gasa. He'll be so full and satiated from his meal on the afternoon, late afternoon of the 14th, that when it comes to the evening of the 15th, he will be eating his matzah on a full belly, bikoshi, with great difficulty getting the matzah down. And that's called achila gasa. Achila gasa is hafka shem achila. It's not called a ma'isa achila. And therefore, you would not fulfill the mitzvah by erev tochlu matzahs in a case of achila gasa. And this is all based on a sugya at the end of Masechet Yoma, where the Gemara says that ochel achila gasa b'yom kippurim pot, because achila gasa lav shmei achila. Now, truth be told, there are different levels of achila gasa. Could be that if you eat something and you're full, that's not called achila gasa. Achila gasa, that's mafkir, the shem ochel, is what's called kotz b'mizono. I mean, he's almost going to regurgitate. He can't get it down. And therefore, they prohibit it. But that Isser of Achila, being Kovea Suda, for the sake of guaranteeing that he doesn't eat matzah with an Achila Gasa, that begins with the beginning of the 10th hour, the end of the 9th hour. Omar Avina Toshma. I'm going to prove to you what the halacha is in this case. The Brisa tells us, Afilu Agripas HaMelech. Now, there's a machlokus here between the Rashbam and Tosfos about who this Agrippas exactly was in terms of his genealogy. We'll get to that later on. It's not important for us now. But regarding this king of Agrippas, who was king during the latter half of Vaisheni, in that period of time after the Ness of Hanukkah, when the Chashmonoim took over the Malchus, so he was from Beis Chashmonoi. Again, we'll get back to the Machlokas, Rashbam, and Tosfos. But Hayaragil Lechel B'Teisha Shol. This is mind boggling. He had his breakfast at Teisha Shols. Teisha Shols is middle of the afternoon. And also Hayom, but on Erev Pesach, Lo Yochal Ad Shetechsha. On Erev Pesach, don't eat the Suda until it gets dark. So the Gemara is going to try to explain what this brisa is all about. But first, let's take a little break for a second. And let's explain. The Rashbam says that about Agrippas, he was a melech kosher mimalchei Chashmonoim. Now, the malchei Chashmonoim, for the most part, were good guys, and he was from... The Rashbam doesn't have any doubts about his genealogy, but Tosfos, even Amaskal Afilu, a short Tosfos, he says that the Rashbam made a little bit of a mistake, or he wasn't careful about what he wrote, because the Gemara tells us in Sota that Agrippas, when he read the Torah once in 7 years publicly at Hakel, which is Mishnah Torah, they read Sefer Dvarim. The Melech was once in 7 years on Sukkot. He was in charge of reading it out loud after the Shvius year. When he got up to the pasuk, "Mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech, lo tuchal loses alecha ish nachri asher lo achichahu." When he read that pasuk that you're not allowed to put a non-Jew or someone who has on his paternal side non-Jewish lineage, and can't appoint such a person as a melech, Zolgu ain't of the most. The Gemara says he started crying. Says Tosfos, why was he crying? Because his father was not Jewish. He came from a mixed marriage. So therefore, Rashbam shouldn't have said that he was from the Sherin. He wasn't exactly kosher Malchus. Now, why was it that Agrippas HaMelech would eat his meal, his breakfast, as late as the 9th hour? Tosfos explains, Dibra Masel Shahaya, that the reason why he ate at such a late hour, in the name of the Yesh Mefarsh, is because Derech Malachim, it was the kings, the Gemara tells us in Brachos Haftes, to wake up in the morning, Shah Shlishis Bayom. So let's say if daybreak was at 6 a.m., they didn't wake up until 9 a.m., 3 hours later. Now, the Gemara also tells us that a Talmud Chacham should eat his Suda b'shah shishis, at the 6th hour. And now Agrippas is eating at the 9th hour. Why? Because he would wake up 3 hours later, and the Talmud Chacham would eat 3 hours later than everyone else. So when he would wake up, he would add another 3 hours. Kidei linog bi'atzmo minog talmidei chacham. He tried to fear tzach as if he was a Talmud Chacham. In any event, there's this whole long discussion here about why he ate his meal at such a late hour. Bishah chias shel hayom, which would be approximately, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 p.m. And Ravina says the following. I can understand this brisa if you're going to say samach lemincha ketana tanan, that when our Mishnah says that you're not allowed to be kovei sud on erev Pesach, it meant at the end of the ninth hour. That's called samach lemincha ketana. Is hainu rabusa da gripas. Now the brisa tells me a chiddush in the context of Agrippas, that even though his minhag was to start the meal on a daily basis the whole year round, at the beginning of the ninth hour. Now, the beginning of the ninth hour, if you hold Samach LeMincha Tanan, is before the Shas Isur, because the Shas Isur Mincha Ketana, we said, it was the beginning of the 10th hour, the end of the ninth hour. He would eat his meal at the beginning of the ninth hour, 1 hour before Mincha Ketana, Samach LeMincha. Is now we have a big chiddush that he's not allowed to eat on Erev Pesach, Lo Yochal Ad Shetechach. That's the language of the Brisa. Why? Because we're afraid that he'll be nimshach, he'll continue his suda after the ninth hour, and after the ninth, meaning the end of the ninth hour, beginning of the 10th, and now he's entering into that time period of Samach LeMincha when it's also to eat. So the Brisa wants to tell me this chiddush, that even though he started his meal at the beginning of the ninth hour, and the Isar Achil is not until the end of the ninth hour. Nevertheless, he's not allowed to start his meal at the beginning of the ninth hour, because he's going to be Nimshach, and we know for sure he's going to continue eating his meal into the time of Isar. If the halacha requires that on Erev Pesach from Chatzos, from midday, we have to abstain from being Kovei Seuda, then Chal Isar Alei Kara. When he gets to the ninth hour, he's already 3 hours into the Zman HaIsur, so for sure he's not allowed to eat. So the Gemara now asks the Kasha, Ella, Samach LeMincha Ketana Tanan. Now you're going to go back to that Mishnah based on this price of Agrippas, and you're going to interpret it as referring to what? As referring to Samach LeMincha Ketana. Is sof my Rabuse de Agrippas, Hamatio Leizman Isura. There's no chiddush in the price of Agrippas about this Isur of eating a Sud on Erev Pesach, because even if you're going to tell me that he started his Suda at the beginning of the ninth hour, but Hamatu Leizman Isura, we know for sure that he's going to continue his meal way into the Shas Isur, beyond the 10th hour. Now here, we have a very basic question to ask. And the Rashbam relates to this question. Rabbi Yossi, back on Daf Kuf, was of the opinion that Hiskil Adam Lechal, if a person started Beheter on Erev Pesach, he doesn't have to be mafsik when the Zman Isur comes. So that, why does the Gemara say there's no chiddush here? There's a big chiddush. It's against Rabbi Yossi, because you're telling me now that since he started his meal at the beginning of the ninth and he's continuing into the 10th, he's not allowed to eat after the 10th hour. According to Rabbi Yossi, since he was maskil beheter, he's allowed to continue. We don't force him to stop eating. So the answer, says the Rashbam, is Modesh Asur. In the case of Agrippas, would be Asur. Why? Because his das was mitchilaso, to be mamshech his suda after the Zman HaIsur. When do we say, according to Rabbi Yossi, that he started beheter, he's allowed to continue, we don't force him to stop? That's because he had no intention of continuing and extending his meal into and beyond the Shas Isur. But the Gemara argues in the price of Agrippas, we knew up front, there was no issue, no question about it, that he was going to continue his meal into the 10th hour into the Shas Isur. So for sure, we're not going to allow him to eat at that time. The Gemara says, "Mao de Tema." We could have explained that Agrippas would not be included in this Isur. Why? Teisha shows Agrippas, as far as his physical body is concerned, since he was what's the word I'm looking for? He was addicted. No, that's another word that I'm used to. Anyway, his body was conditioned, I'll use that word, programmed, to eat at the ninth hour, his ninth hour for his body that's been trained to eat at the ninth hour is like the fourth hour for us. In other words, we eat at the fourth hour, he ate at the ninth hour. And therefore, just like we're allowed to eat on Erev Pesach at the fourth hour, then Agrippa should be also allowed to eat at the ninth hour because his ninth hour is like our fourth hour. And it's all based on the regilus, on how you get used to eating. It's Kamash Malan. Therefore, we needed the Brisa to teach me this chiddush that even though Agrippas used, generally speaking, would start his meal at the ninth hour, nevertheless, he's not allowed to eat on Erev Pesach until nightfall. So the maskana is that we have a final pshitus of the suffix that samach lemincha means samach lemincha katana, and we're afraid that he might eat matzah and achila gasa. And the chiddush of Agrippas is that we don't say that his ninth hour is like our fourth hour, and therefore he's allowed. In the Havbina we would have said he's allowed to eat even into the 10th hour, but if his kavana was if the Mishnah intended to speak about Samach L'Mincha Gdola, then the Chashash would be because of Asiyas HaPesach, and there would be no Chiddush in the Brisa of Agrippas. L'maskana, it seems that the Isser of eating on Erev Pesach is because of matzah. Now the question is, are there any things that we would allow you to eat after the period of Samach L'Mincha Kan on Erev Pesach? Amar of Asi, even though you're not allowed to be Koveh Suda and set up a meal on Erev Pesach Samach L'Mincha on Pas, Aval Matbilhu B'mini Targamina. He can eat through what we call tibul. Tibul is a phrase used as like whenever you accompany something with your achila. And meaning targima, he's allowed to eat. Targima means peros ubasar, below lechem. That he's allowed to eat mina mincha ulamala on Erev Pesach. And we're not afraid that he'll be eating his matzah as an achila gas. So I don't know if you've ever been at any Ruach Pesach, and if you've ever been in a hotel for Pesach or anything of the like. On Erev Pesach in the afternoon, they serve a lot of different things for the guests of the hotel. And sometimes it's a little too much. They give you all sorts of potatoes and meats and chickens. I don't know what they give you. And then by the time you get to matzah, you're not hungry for the matzah. So you got to be very careful, even with minei teturgama. Rabbi Yitzchak mitabel biyarke. He would take greens, he would take vegetables, and he would probably cook them, and that's what he would eat mina mincha lamala. And he said that he didn't get full from eating vegetables, but rather that the vegetables would be gorer his te'ovan, would make him even more hungry, and he would desire to eat. Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa that supports this approach of Rav Asi and of Rabbi Yitzchak, that there are things that you can eat on Erev Pesach even after Mincha L'Mayla, and it's Moshech the Suda, Moshech the Leiv for the Suda's Erev, Hashamash Metabel B'nei Me'ayin. So apparently they made some sort of a rotev, some sort of gravy out of the kishkes of an animal after it was shechted. So they shechted the animal for the Suda of Yontif, but they had the B'nei Me'ayim, the intestines, that wasn't considered something chashuv that you put on the table. And the Shamoshim would eat some of this, these B'nei Me'ayim. B'nosan L'fnei Orchim. Let's say, for example, you have a number of people who are monui together in one chabura on the Korban Pesach, and they would even deliberately eat from these B'nei Me'ayim on Erev Pesach in order to generate an appetite, a te'omon, for eating the matzah and the Pesach. Even if I can't prove it to you from a pasuk, but I do have a memory device of some sort, a zeichel ledavar, shenemar, because it says in Yirmiyah, niru lachem nir v'al tizru el kotzin. In other words, when you have a field and you want to plant the field, then there are kotzim, there are thorns in the ground, and therefore do a charisha, which means plow the field and get rid of these coats. And in a funny sort of sense, you're digging into the ground here. You're plowing the ground so that the ground itself could then receive zriya and, so to speak, be satiated. So the nivchal is that a person could sometimes eat something which seems to be, at the face of it, you say he's filling up his belly, and it's the last thing he's doing is stimulating his appetite, and yet that eating paradoxically opens up his intestines in such a way that he wants to continue eating, and he has a desire to eat more. Rav Avishasi Chamra, Rava would drink wine, Kule Mali Yoma de Pischa, during the entire Erev Pesach. And why? It would stimulate his appetite, and he would have more te'ov and nechol matzah tfei. He would even eat more matzah l'te'ov. Now again, the language of the Gemara is a little bit difficult. It says the nechol matzah tfei, as if to say he would eat more matzah. I mean, there's no mitzvah to eat more matzah. I think it means tfei here means with more te'ovon. And this is like counterintuitive. I know when I drink wine, it fills up my belly. But the Gemara is going to say later on a very strange thing. We'll have to ask the gastro people. And if you drink a little bit of wine, it fills you up and you have no appetite. But if you drink a lot of wine, it actually gets the system going, and the intestines want more, and you get even more hungry. Omar Rava Minah Midale, the Chamer Migra Garit. This Rava wants to say, I'm going to prove, I need a Mishnah in order to be comfortable about the fact that drinking wine actually stimulates the appetite. Tisnan, and he quotes the Mishnah at the end of this Masechta, and here we'll turn to Daf Kuf Ches Amid Aleph, Bein HaKosos Halalu, it's between the first kos and the second kos of the fourth, or between the second and the third, Im Rotzel Lishtos Yishte, he's allowed to drink. Bein Shlish Revi Lo Yishte, that has to do with halacha called Mosif, Nirakim Mosif ala Kosos. And Rav explains what he wants to derive from this Mishnah regarding Shtiyas Yayin, that it doesn't satiate you. On the contrary, it's Gorer Hatava. If you're going to tell me by drinking wine, he's going to fill up his belly. Now, again, we're talking about between the first and the second kosos. First kos is the kos of Kiddush. Second kos is the kos of Magid. And it's only after Magid that he's going to be eating the matzah. So he's now drinking between the first and the second and the third. And that's before Haka. If you're going to tell me he's going to fill up his belly on wine, then he's going to be eating the matzah and achila gasa. If we have to conclude the exact opposite conclusion, that Shtiyas Yain Goreres es Hatava and Eino Masbir. Just to add at the end of the shir, and I want to wish a bon voyage to Jerry. He should have a very safe and enjoyable trip. And David, you're with me, you're the pillar. So he goes on and he says that Mikra Din, it should have been also to drink wine even between the first two kosos, because it's nira kimosif ala kosos. There are 4 kosos, we have to drink 4, and not more than 4. But they were matir drinking between the 2 kosos rishonos in order to stimulate the appetite for achilas matzah. Because matzah is because yayin is gorer es hateyov, and it stimulates the appetite. But when he gets to the kos shlishi v'elach, and he's already eaten his matzah, so there's no point to be matir drinking extra kosos, so he's nirek and most kosos, when he's not interested and there's no point to stimulating his appetite, he's already eaten the matzah. Now the Gemara in Brachos says on Daf Lamed Hey that yayin mazbia, that yayin actually fills you up, which seems to be contradicting our Gemara. So he says that's only, the Gemara explains, when you're drinking a small amount of wine. But if shosa harbe gore mayayin legore hateyom, it's counterintuitive. If you drink more wine, you're more hungry and you've stimulated your appetite. Now you can eat the matzah Te'avan. And he quotes here in the note a Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz, who adds that Kol Mokom Hamuveres Brayas HaGemara Shayayin Gorer V'Eino Masbia. He says you find very often that the Gemara mentions that Yayin is Gorer. It's not satiating, but on the contrary. Lefisha Kan Behechrech Meduba V'Shtia Meruba. Here again, we're talking about a larger volume of wine. He's adding a kos between the other two kosos that he drank, the first two kosos. And it's a large volume of wine in his belly, and therefore it's not masbia, and therefore be able to eat matzah subsequently liteyava. And now he quotes Rabbeinu David, the Talmud of the Ramban, who says, "Afal pisha nokta hagemara brava b'dvar bina aminale techama migra goria, ein kavanos lochiach misham chayayin gorer l'teyav nelagak sheinu masbia." All he's proving from that Mishnah is that you're allowed to drink between the kotzos because it's not masbia, it doesn't satiate you. And zeh nitan lilmod mimashem mutar lishtos bein hakosos, that we're not choshish that it'll eat the matzah achila gas. That's the Gemara's language. V'yam mitzad soid haka'achil matzah achila gas. But there's no proof here from this Mishnah that shtiyas yain is goreres l'teyov. In other words, there's no room to asa drinking wine between a kotzos unless you have the reason of lo yochal shem yochal matzah achila gas. And since yain is not soed, memeli you're allowed to drink wine. However, the Rashbam seems to indicate that Mikra Din, we should have prohibited drinking between the kotzos because it's nira kemotzif al hakosos. They were only materid in order to be gorer the leiv, so they could eat matzah l'teyov. And Rabbeinu David doesn't seem to be working with those premises. He's not talking about motzif al hakosos. He just wants to know whether or not there's a chash of achilas matzah as an achila gasa. That's all that's on the table. And the Chazon Ish writes that according to this, yesh lochiv mikan shayayin gora hamachol. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop. So, Mr. Hashem, let's make a note that tomorrow we begin with Rav Sheshes Haviyosiv B'Tanise Kol Male Yoma de Pischa here on Daf Kuf Ches Keminyan Kach.